everybody. Thanks for tuning in again today. I'm going to share with you my process for sharpening a Japanese sickle. We are going to be using one of the compact sharpening stones that we carry in our store. And this is a dual grit, double-sided stone. We'll also talk some about general care and maintenance of the sickle, keeping your handle in good shape and also just looking after the metal head. And lastly, we'll go over some other options you have for sharpening. You may not have one of these, maybe you have something else, and there's lots of different ways to get the blade sharp. So let's head over to the bench and we'll take a closer look. Okay, so we've got our water stone soaking in water, and these stones like to sit for about 15 to 20 minutes or so before they're really ready to use. They don't work dry, so they need to be soaked. Now this is a good time to remove any heavy rust if your blade's picked up some rust. This blade does have some rust on it, but it's okay. The stone will remove a good portion of it. If it's really rusty, you end up just kind of bogging down your stone by removing the rust. It bogs down your stone. So one tool that's pretty handy are these rust erasing blocks, and these are available. They're inexpensive. You can find them on Amazon and elsewhere online, and it's sort of like a rubber block that has grit in it, or that's mixed together. So it kind of acts like sandpaper, but it's a lot easier to hold, and it kind of conforms nicely to edges, which makes it nice for sickles and scythe blades, and also for cleaning pruners and shears and that sort of thing. So I don't think this is going to take off too much. It really works best with more superficial rust, and this rust looks like it's on there. But it's not a bad idea to go through and get off what you can. There are different grits for these blocks, and I would recommend medium probably. I think this may be a fine one, and it's not. That's why it's not taking off too much. You'll notice that I'm sanding away from the blade, and that just avoids putting any grit inside on the cutting edge. Okay, so nice to do that at first. Not critical. If your rust is really seated on there, you may need to use a wire wheel. You can buy small wire wheels that fit on an electric drill, or you can also do a vinegar soak. You can soak carbon steel tools in vinegar overnight, and then the rust comes off pretty easily. Maybe I'll do a video demonstrating that at some point. So what I've found to be the easiest way to kind of stabilize the tool is to put the head on the edge of a bench or a table. So the cutting edge itself is resting off the edge, but the back of the tool is on the bench. And then either I like to hold the head in place with my left hand, with my thumb like that, or I'll keep it in my left hand here and hold it like so. It's a little awkward when it's this way to reach with the stone over this handle, as you'll see. The next step, which is very helpful, is to color in the bevel with a Sharpie. And you don't need to hit every spot, but make sure that you've at least gotten the whole cutting edge, down to that very tip there, and at least some of it near the top of the bevel there. And I'm going to do this on both sides. And the reason for this is, as we're sharpening, we're going to be removing the permanent marker, and it's going to let us know how evenly we are removing metal. So here's our stone, and as I mentioned that this is a double-sided, we have the coarse blue side here, which is about 180 grit, 200 grit, and then here is our finishing side, which is 1000 grit, which is something of a medium fine. It's not a really fine grit. You could go higher, 2000, 4000, but it's not really necessary. You'll still get good results just using this stone. And so we're going to start with circular motions, and we're going to try to hit the the back of this, the top of this bevel first, and then make our way down to the cutting edge. And so we do that by keeping our hand relatively flat initially, okay? And you can see there already where fresh metal is being revealed. And that's what we want. So that's where I want to start. I'll make a couple passes, and then I begin to drop my wrist. Circular motions, a little bit of downward pressure, but not a whole lot. You start to see this mud, and that's a good thing. That's what we want to see. But for the sake of seeing what we're doing, let's wipe that mud away and inspect our blade here. So much of the Sharpie has been removed. You can see there's still some in there. And there's still some along a portion of the cutting edge itself. So that's where the Sharpie comes in real handy, because we want to make sure that we have removed metal all the way to that apex, it's called, where the blade really ends, because that's your cutting edge. So we're going to continue, and I'm going to drop my hand a little bit more to make sure that we get that last bit of Sharpie. One of the reasons that I like this stone so much is because it's double-sided, it's quite thick. And so my fingers are well away from the cutting edge when I'm sharpening. And I'll show you some other options for sharpening sickles, some that I've used in the past, and why they're not as safe. Because they're a lot skinnier and your fingers are a lot closer. So I'm just slowly dropping my hand, so it's making a steeper angle with the stone. And we'll take a look here. So all of our Sharpie's gone. And the next thing we want to do is feel for a burr. So a burr is a little edge, a little wire edge of metal that gets pushed to the other side of this blade. So as we're sharpening on this side, we're removing metal, and then we actually push a little bit of metal onto the back side. And you can feel it distinctly. So I'm running my finger very lightly and away from the edge. You see, I'm not pushing into the edge, I'm pulling away. And I want to feel for that burr. And if you're not sure what the burr feels like, feel the side that you just sharpened on. This feels very smooth. There's not sort of a jagged, you really can't miss it. You'll know when you feel it. And you want to make sure that you feel it along the entire edge of the blade. So let's say I feel it here and here and here, but I don't feel it on this side of the blade, then I want to sharpen this side more till I get that burr. But as it is, I feel a burr on this whole cutting edge. And so that's my sign that it is time for me to switch sides and go to the other side. If I don't raise a burr, then I really haven't sharpened the cutting edge. I may have removed a metal from this portion up here, but I haven't removed enough metal to actually get to the cutting edge. So we are going to switch sides, and we're going to do the same thing. I just dipped this back in water. Another tip with these stones is they do wear out over time, and so if you can switch the direction that you're using them, they will wear out more evenly. So I was sharpening this way at first, and now I'll flip the stone around and I'll pull this little hanger out of the way, and we will commence on this other side. Alright, so let's see where we're at after that. Looks like we did pretty well as far as removing the Sharpie. I can still see there is some there in the middle. When you go to sharpen your own blades, you'll see where high and low spots are in the blade, which is kind of interesting. Because you can see there's sort of a low spots all along the middle section of this blade because I'm removing metal more easily from the top and the bottoms. Anyway, if we wanted to get a really flat bevel, meaning remove this low point, or remove the high points really is the way to put it, we could go back and forth with that coarse grit until we got there. But it doesn't really matter on a sickle to have a perfectly flat bevel. It's not like a carving knife. So what I'm looking for here is that the Sharpie is removed, or mostly removed, and then I'm feeling now on the opposite side again for a burr. I want to have pushed that burr back to the other side. And I'm feeling it here, kind of stops right in here, and I'm not feeling it down to the tip. So I'm going to sharpen in this section some more. Yeah, that's better. Hey guys, just a quick note before we continue. You don't have to use the bench to get a good result. I like to put my sickle on the workbench. I think it minimizes some of the user error, it keeps some of the wobble out of it. It's also convenient for me because that's where I store my sickle, where my bench is, and where I store my water stone and all that. But if that doesn't work for you, know that you can also do it just standing up or kneeling. And what I like to do in that setting is to take the butt of the handle and pull it tightly against my side, and that minimizes some of the wobble. And then I have my blade vertical, as you can see, and then I'm going to take my stone and just do the exact same process that we're doing over on the bench, just arranged differently. So I'm still starting at the top of the bevel, and I'm dropping my wrist as I go down to get to that cutting edge, and then I just flip it over so the blade's pointing down, and do the same thing on the other side. All the while I'm giving it some tension against the side of my body. The nice thing about doing it this way is when the blade is vertical, you can look straight down at the edge and really see that angle. You can really tell as you drop your wrist how that's affecting where the stone is hitting the blade. So both ways will work, and now let's get back to the sharpening. Okay, so we've raised a burr on both sides. So now we're going to do the same process on the first side again, but with the 1000 grit side of the stone, so the brown side. Now if you'd like at this point, you can color in your bevel again, but I'm just going to go ahead and, for the sake of getting this done, do this without. You can also see where the stone is just by how the metal changes. This is going to start to polish a little bit, and that can also be a good indication for you of where your stone is hitting and where it's not. And I probably haven't been keeping as good of track as I could be on this one of how many times I've gone back and forth. It's nice to do similar amount of sharpening on either side so that the blade stays centered. It's not really super critical, but it's nice. So you could count, to the tip and back as one, and maybe count however many times you do it, and try to do something similar on each side. But I've just been kind of just going on feel here. This side works up a really nice mud. I find that sharpening though it's a little bit challenging at first, it has become for me something that's very relaxing, very enjoyable. And even though my results aren't always perfect, I am noticing enough progress that it keeps me coming back for more. You know, it's like once you start to get, when you're not good at something, it can be frustrating and challenging. But once you start to make a little bit of progress, it starts to get a little more fun. So hopefully you can tell with this light, I'm starting to get a little more of a shine. I'd like to go a little bit more here. Feeling a burr, the center part here, but not quite so much here, not quite so much there near the handle. I'm going to go a little bit more. Okay. Switch over to the second side. And then again, I'm going to start at the top of this bevel. The stone is mostly flat. And then slowly drop my wrist to make the angle steeper till I'm finally coming down on that cutting edge. Now the reason that you want to sharpen this whole bevel, and when I say bevel I'm referring to this, the shiny silver part here, is because if you just sharpen the very cutting edge, you know, like the very tip, or not really the tip, but the very edge, you end up with a blade as you sharpen that is increasingly thicker and thicker. And part of the reason that a sickle cuts so well is because it's thin. Not just because it's sharp, but because it's thin. And when you sharpen from the top of the bevel down to the bottom, where the cutting edge is, you maintain that thin profile. You maintain the proper sort of geometry of the blade. So it's important to do. And you can get away with, you know, every once in a while just sharpening the very cutting edge. And I'll show you a tool you can use in a little bit to do that. But just like sharpening an axe, you want to sharpen the whole bevel. It really makes a big difference in the performance of the tool. Okay, let's wipe away our mud. And assess where we're at here. Feeling for a burr on the back side. Yeah, I definitely got a burr all the way through there. So now what I like to do is a few more passes on each side with the 1000 grits, the fine side of the stone. And my objective here is to kind of wipe away that burr. So as you can see, I'm just doing a kind of a pull stroke, not the circular motion. A few strokes on each side. And I'll push that burr back over to that side. And then I'm going to switch back. Ultimately, if I can erase the burr entirely, that's a good thing. Though it's not critical with a sickle like it is with a kitchen knife. You know, it's more important with a kitchen knife. But essentially, I'm going to be going back and forth here for a number of passes. And my strokes kind of get lighter. And they also get less in number. With a stone such as 1000 grit, it can be hard to remove the burr entirely. It's easy just to keep pushing it back and forth. So if you want to refine your edge a little bit and you're feeling sort of like a cowboy, you can strop the blade on your pants if you're wearing a pair of jeans or a pair of canvas Carhartts or whatever. If you're not familiar with stropping, usually it's done on leather, and as I understand it, it's sort of a combination. You're doing a little bit of polishing, but you're also removing the burr either by rubbing it away or perhaps by folding it over back and forth enough times that it breaks off. So I was talking to a guy who sharpens for a living in San Francisco. We were talking about pruners, and he said that you can just strop your pruners on your pants just like this. So I figured, hey, why not do it with a sickle? Always strop away from yourself, how the blade's moving away. I think that's probably really obvious because you would potentially cut yourself really badly. So after stropping, I still feel a little bit of a burr, but it's much less pronounced. So that's a good sign. Shows me that that's doing something. And then how do you know when it's sharp? It's always a question. Well, in some ways the proof is simply in the pudding. Just go out and cut something. Try to cut some grass, something that's a little bit finer. You can cut comfrey all day long with a dull tool, but grass isn't so forgiving. So try something like that and see how well it slices. You can also do the thumbnail test. Very carefully, if you take your blade and you stick it on the back of your thumbnail, sharp blades tend to bite. This is sort of sticking and starting to dig into my nail. Dull blades will slide off. So that's another way that you can sort of gauge the sharpness yourself. But really, just get out there and use it and see how it feels. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about some other tools you can use for sharpening. I really like this double-sided stone. I feel that the grits are really practical, the 180 and the 1000. It's good for axes, it's good for machetes. As I mentioned while I was sharpening, I like the thickness of it because it keeps my fingers well away, and it's pretty inexpensive. It's only about 20 bucks. So it's got this little handy hanger so you can hang it to dry. If you already have a full-size bench stone, then this will also work just fine for sharpening your sickle. It's a little big, it's harder to hold, but you would use it in just the same way as we did the small stone. You would just keep this stationary and then use this stone, right? So perfectly viable option. These are just more expensive, so if you're not planning to sharpen knives and you only need something smaller, then this is a more economical option. Okay. Now, some other stones that I've used, these are pretty common. This is a diamond hone or paddle. So it's steel and it has the diamond dust on it. These work great and they come in a variety of grits. This is a medium grit, so you would use a probably medium or coarse and move up into a fine grit probably, which I believe is red with these. The danger with these is your fingers are close to the cutting edge. So if you're going to do this, wear a glove and hold it as low down as you can. I have cut myself using these before because that circular motion is just the perfect way to cut yourself. The same is true for these. This is a ceramic stone. These are made by Spyderco. They're pretty nifty, really thin, super fine. This is an incredibly fine edge. It hardly removes any metal. This could be a good finishing stone. Actually, you could use it sort of in lieu of a strop, just for your final sharpening pass. Another option are these carbide files. Now this is simply a piece of plastic with some carbide inserted into them. Speedy Sharp is one that's fairly common. This one's made by Baco. Carbide is really hard, and so it actually will remove metal on the softer carbon steels. Now these work pretty well, and they're especially handy for pruners. I love these for sharpening pruners. The problem with these for something like a sickle or an axe is because the sharpener is so small, you can really only sharpen a small portion of this blade. You don't really get that full effect of being able to sharpen from up here all the way to down there. You can pretty much only sharpen down there. And so, every once in a while, it's not a bad idea if you want to keep this with you out in the field, maybe if you're doing a lot of sickling in a day. But I wouldn't make this your main sickle sharpener, because over time you're going to end up with sort of an increasingly thick blade, which isn't going to cut as well. The last thing I thought I'd just mention is a file. And while files are wonderful for garden tools, soil working tools, they're a little bit coarse for a sickle like this. Now, if your sickle was really, really dull, maybe damaged, you might want to start with a file to sort of get the shape back. But then you'd want to finish on some kind of stone. So let's talk a little bit about keeping our tool rust-free, which, as you can see, I haven't done the best job of. But what I have started doing is using camellia oil, and when I'm done using a tool, or after sharpening, I'll wipe it down and put a little bit of camellia oil on there and just wipe it with a rag. That way, next time I use the tool, it's all ready to go. It's not going to pick up any rust from just being in the shed. Camellia oil is nice because it's plant-based, so it's non-toxic, and it stays viscous even in cold weather, which makes it very nice for pruners and loppers and other metal tools with moving parts. You could simply spray this tool with Crisco or something like that, which would be an inexpensive and a fast solution. But something like Crisco isn't going to work very well for your tools with moving parts, because it's going to get goopy when it's cold. And finally, you can use linseed oil, as I've talked about in another video, to keep your handle in good shape. You can give it a light sand and a coat of oil, maybe once a season. And I like to put a little hole in the handle there at the palm swell so that I can hang it on a wall. And that's that. Sickle is ready for action.